Next, we want to talk about different ways of writing inequalities. So we're going to start with the inequality -3 is less than x is less than 1. So this is referring to all of the numbers on the number line that fall in between -3 and +1, but aren't actually equal to -3 or +1. So that could include 0, it could include 1/2, -2.9, so on and so forth. Now, one way of writing our inequalities is in what we call set builder notation. And basically, set builder notation just takes the exact same inequality, repeats it over again, but it puts it inside of a set of curly braces, and it starts it out with an x or whatever the variable in here happens to be. We start with x, and then we have this vertical bar which represents such that. So the way that we would read this is the set of all x such that -3 is less than x is less than 1. Now we can also write this inequality in what's known as interval notation. And what that looks like is parentheses -3, comma 1, parentheses. Now the next inequality, we have 4 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 7. So in this case, both the 4 and the 7 are included. So we're talking about all the numbers in between 4 and 7 on our number line, including 4 and 7. So again, our set builder notation would just be the set of all x such that 4 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 7. But now for our interval notation, this would be bracket 4, comma 7, bracket. So notice the difference between these two. When the -3 and the 1 were not included, when it was just strictly less than symbols in here, we used parentheses on either side of our interval notation. When the endpoints were included, so when we had less than or equal to symbols in here, we used brackets. So parentheses are when the numbers are not included. Brackets are for when the numbers are included. So if we have an inequality like -2 is less than or equal to x is less than 0, this one includes the -2 but does not include the 0. So that means in our interval notation, the -2 would get a bracket while the 0 gets a parenthesis. -5 is less than x is less than or equal to 12. So this one includes the 12 but not the -5. So in interval notation, the -5 gets a parenthesis, the 12 gets a bracket. Now with an open-ended interval, like x is greater than -1, so this is referring to all of the numbers that are strictly bigger than -1. So that could be 0, -1/2, -0.99. It could also be 100, 10,000, and so on and so forth, as big as you can think of. So in our set builder notation, again, it's just going to be that inequality inside of the curly parentheses. But in interval notation, because we're talking about all of the numbers bigger than -1 up to infinity, the way we write that is -1, comma infinity. The -1 is not included, so it gets a parenthesis. And the infinity gets a parenthesis just because infinity always gets a parenthesis. Infinity is just a symbol. It's not actually a real number that we can reach, that we can count up to. So for that reason, it gets a parenthesis, never a bracket. So x greater than or equal to 3, that's talking about all the numbers that are bigger than 3, but could also be equal to 3. So that's going to look exactly the same as this one, except because the 3 is included, it gets a bracket instead of a parenthesis. But the infinity still gets a parenthesis. X is less than 2, so this is talking about all of the numbers that are strictly smaller than 2. So from 1.99999 all the way down to negative infinity. So the way we write that in interval notation is negative infinity first, because that's smaller, and then the 2. Again, negative infinity gets a parentheses always, just like positive infinity does. And then in this case, the 2 also gets a parenthesis because it's not included. X is less than or equal to negative 3, so this is going to look exactly the same as this, except now that negative 3 is going to get a bracket because it's included. Now, if we're talking about all real numbers, the way that we can write that in our set builder notation is we say the set of all x such that x is a real number. What that looks like in interval notation is negative infinity to positive infinity, both in parentheses, just because they always get parentheses. So if we have the set of all x such that negative 2 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 2, so this is talking about all of the numbers in between negative 2 and positive 2, including negative 2 and positive 2, so they both get brackets. X is strictly greater than 3, so we're going from 3 to infinity. The 3 is not included, so it gets a parenthesis. Infinity always gets a parenthesis. And then the set of all x such that negative 4 is less than or equal to x is less than negative 3. So we're going from negative 4 to negative 3. The negative 4 is included. The negative 3 is not included.